Live in Albuquerque?
I do.
Oh, I see.
Can you say your name and spell it for me, please?
Okay, my name is William Thomas Northcutt Jr. It's WILLIAM Northcutt NORTHCUTT Jr.
And where were you born?
I was born in Hardin County, Tennessee. That's Savannah, Tennessee was the county seat or whatever. We was out in the country on a farm.
And where were you living prior to coming to K-25?
I had gone to Memphis to work. We had moved to Mississippi in '43, and I was a senior there. I finished a junior year in Savannah, and when I graduated from Mississippi, Corinth, Mississippi, went to service for 1 week, and they told me to go back home. I had a hernia, and to get a defense job. Well, I was working in a pants factory there, shipping Army pants. And so I decided I'd go to Memphis to get a better job. So I went to Memphis and went to work for Fisher Aircraft, building B-25s, working straight, midnight, 6 days a week. And we built so many, I reckon, within about 8 months, they shut down the graveyard shift. I was working graveyard shift. And sent me down to the employment office, and I talked to several different people. There wasn't anything in Memphis that I liked, which I liked Memphis awful well at that time. I was 18 years old. But they said, well, we got a firm here from Knoxville, Union Carbide, and said if you'd like to talk to them. So I said, yeah, I'll talk to them. So when I went in and talked to them, they offered me a job near Knoxville, Tennessee as an operator at 85 cents an hour. So I said, I'll take it. And I said, how about giving me a couple of weeks, to get there, which Corinth was about 100 miles from Memphis. So I went to Memphis to home for about 2 weeks and caught the Tennessean to Knoxville, Tennessee, and sent me to the Union Carbide office down there. And from there, they put us on an Army bus and brought us to Oak Ridge. But we didn't know what Oak Ridge was, and they didn't name Oak Ridge back then.
What was your first recollection of seeing K-25 in Oak Ridge?
It was out of this world. Oak Ridge, because there's 75,000 people here then in a little town, and they didn't have room for everybody. And it was muddy in a lot of places. They had wooden sidewalks part of the ways. And I said to myself, well, I won't be here long. And here I am 60 years later. But seeing the plant just blew my mind.
Can you describe it for me?
Well, it was so huge to start with. It was about 1.25 miles around, and of course it had 4 floors. But I'd never seen anything like this. Of course, I understand it was the largest building in the world at the time anyway.
Yeah.
But as I say, I was starstruck, I guess you'd say. I'd never been anywhere hardly except to Memphis. And it was just an unusual thing.
When you were talking about what you did, how would you describe that to people who were outside of the secret city?
Well, at that time, we weren't supposed to say anything. You got to work out at the plant, And so that's about all you can tell anybody. And people would ask questions, that and other, and then people say, well, they're making safety pins for diapers and all this kind of stuff. So you didn't tell them much about what you were doing. You didn't talk much about that.
You said that people would say they were making safety pins. Were there other stories or things that people would say that you?
Well, they were different things. I can't remember some of them. There's a lot of different people would come up with what they thought was done. But I'll tell you one thing that impressed me. There's a fellow, he's already was in his 60s, Mr. Sessoms, and he worked as my basement operator. I was after I'd made crew leader and had 17 people in one building and all this stuff. And he had arthritis, but I'd go down to see him, and he'd be saying that winds hit my neck and all this stuff. But he cut out a little clipping out of a paper, and brought him one night, and he called me up. They had these ring phones, and ring you upstairs, and wanted me to come down there. So I went down, and he showed me that little piece of paper, and it was where Germany was trying to split the atom using hard water. He says, red, he called me red back then. I had pretty red hair then. And he said, that's what we're doing here. But I never mentioned that to anybody. But, he was smart enough he was on the right track, really, in one sense of the word.
Yeah. Was it hard for you to keep it a secret?
Well, not too much. I guess it just sort of bred in us at that time that you didn't. We'd hear stories about somebody saying something at a beer joint or something, and they didn't see them no more, and stuff like this. So we was pretty well trained in the secrecy.
Yeah. What did you like the most about working at K-25?
I guess meeting so many people and the way people worked in those days. Of course, I never knew anything but work, raised up on a farm, and you started working when you was 5, 6, 7 years old, helping do the work on a farm. So these people amazed me how they worked and didn't take breaks. We didn't even know what breaks was back then in the first few years. But the swiftness of the way things got done. And the buildings of course, they were turning the building over to you, and then a certain group would get it ready, and then we'd start it up and all that stuff. And it just seemed like it was amazing how swiftly K-25 was built and started operating.
Well, and what did you like the least about working at K-25?
I guess start with might have been the shift work. Because I started out on midnight shift, and of course we had a rotating shift, and I was on rotating shift for 38 years. Wow. That's midnights, 4 to 12, and day shift. So, but I got used to it and got where I actually liked it. With the exception when we had children, it's hard to, when your kids are playing sports and things, it's hard to get to some of the things you'd like to go on to. So I guess that was the biggest thing.
And what did you do when you worked there?
I hired in as they call us a process operator. In fact, that's what they told me in Memphis. They just said an operator, I think, at Memphis. And I stayed in that for 10 years, process operator.
And what do you do as a process operator?
You operate the equipment that we were running the process in.
And what level was that on?
Well, your operating equipment was on the cell floor, we called it. And then you had a basement which had fans and things to help maintain temperatures and things. And then you had a pipe gallery where all your piping was enclosed. And then you had the operating floor where you had your panel boards, we called them, where you did the operating from. You had an operator. Start out with, we had 2 operators to every board and things of this nature, which eventually turned out to be 1 operator to 3 or 4 buildings or something.
Was it the room with the
valves, you told me? Yeah. The old K-25 building, all of the early part of it was valves, and some of them were huge, according to what section you were in. Right. And they were pretty hard to turn. You had to operate these valves, what we call taking the cell off stream or putting the cell on stream, and this nature, which was pretty hard work. And we had a lot of it in the early years because just starting up, you had things that happened, and you were scared, and your supervision didn't know for sure, so you'd have to isolate the cell to make sure, the things were all right again.
And then after a while, it just started to flow.
Yeah. And it just got larger and larger. Excuse me. In the equipment, you just gradually kept adding until you got to the complete K-25. And I don't remember exactly what time of the year we got there, and that was to increase your assay of your uranium material, your 235 assay, which is K-25 was the only plant that did that at the time, and Port Portsmouth was built.
Mm-hmm. When did you start and leave K-25?
I started working March the 9th, 1945, is when I went to K-25. And of course, I stayed there over 40 and a half years, but of course, we shut down K-25. And I was in K-25 as an operator for probably 5-6 years till they built the axle plant K-29, and they moved me over there. And I helped operate 29, helped start 31, 33, the larger axle equipment. And then I came back to K-25 as a supervisor in 1955. 10 years later, they made me a supervisor.
And what did you do when you were a supervisor? What were your duties?
To oversee the operation of the section of the plant of the K-25. To start with, I had a certain section, and it eventually turned out I had the whole K-25. Things were running smoother, so they kept eliminating operators and supervision and everything. So it ended up that I had the whole K-25 plant, and it was a long way around. So we had a bicycle from the office. So if you had trouble on one side, you ran your bicycle over there, and then by that time you had trouble on this side, you come back. So then eventually they got us a motor scooter. So we rode a motor scooter on the top floor, of course.
I had not heard of a motor scooter.
Yeah, it was a little something like a golf cart or something. It was motor operated, battery operated.
And I heard that all the bicycles that were there were all women's bikes.
Most of them, but not all of them. No, I can remember, because all operators had bicycles. We had bicycles in the axle plants also, because the operators rode the bicycles getting around.
Oh, what's the axle plant?
Well, the K-25 plant, what I call it, was centrifugal or motors and impeller type thing, and the other was axle compressors, entirely different, made different. Alice Chalmers was the main supplier of that.
And did that have to do with centrifuge?
Nope.
No, that was still gaseous diffusion.
Yeah, that was still gaseous diffusion. The centrifuge came later.
And so what's the main difference? They're both gaseous diffusion. It's just a different process?
From the centrifuge? Or
no,
the
as
axle?
far as the axle.
Oh, it just handled more, just increased your production tremendously.
Okay.
It was larger volumes. And so it was in the lower assay of your cascade, say under 1% of the feed material. And as it came up through there, you increased the assay. So this handled tremendous more of inventory than K-25.
Okay. And you said that you were amazed by the quickness of how things got done. How do you feel like people communicated?
Very well then, I thought. The only problem we had in the early years to me was it was new, and there wasn't anyone that really knew what was going to happen. And so you were very cautious to start with. That's the reason it's gradually speeded up as you learn, and we all pretty well learned together, because it just start sales when I got there, and it wasn't even on the process then. It was, just what you call a safety run or something, or testing the equipment and teaching us operators things of this nature.
Do you think that because it was so secret, you formed stronger bonds with people?
I think so. I think we all felt, excuse me, we were doing something about the war effort. We didn't know what. And I think that drove most of us to, really try to make everything work right and do a good job. That's the way I felt about it.
That's kind of the feeling that I'm getting from hearing people talk, is that you guys all came together for the common good.
That's exactly right. Because back then everything was a war effort, just like I say it, building the planes in Memphis, Fisher Aircraft. And it was about the same way there. I mean, people worked, and they were dedicated to getting something done, which this changed in later years, which bothered me.
Yeah, I don't know if we could get back to those kind of work ethics.
No.
It seems that it might be that kind of far out of reach.
Mm-hmm.
It's a little sad.
Yeah, in later years, and younger people hiring in it felt that, you owed them a living or something, seemed to me. I mean, they wanted all their breaks, and which when I started out, you didn't have breaks. If you were busy, you ate your sandwich or turned the valve or whatever. We didn't have no allowances for breaks. Of course, you didn't have a union to start with, and then we got one of those later, and then that started to change things too.
What was the difference? What was the major difference between having not having a union and having a union?
Well, I think we were more together as before the union, because you had representatives from the union, and they had to represent your supervision like me. You'd get grievances, and you had to work that out then with your union representatives, and it just made a sort of a complete difference in operation, you know. Of course, the unions, I think, done some good in their times and all, but of course we had a strike or two too, you know. I was out on the strike myself one time for 2 days while I was an operator. And then as a supervisor, they were out I don't know how long it was, but I stayed out there 24 hours a day then. I was on supervision then, and so we had to work 24 hours a day.
What were you guys striking about?
Wages. I think it's 2 cents they got the first time, 2 cents an hour, maybe 6 cents an hour the next time.
And that was a significant increase.
Yeah, back then.
And as far as health facilities, do you feel that was adequate?
Yeah, I do. Because I can remember we had a dispensary, we called it, and a main dispensary, and you had a nurse on all shifts. And they pretty well took care of us. You know, if you got sick, or if somebody mashed a finger, or something like this, you didn't have a doctor except on days. And then they also had, I know in K-25, remember, they had one little infirmary downstairs, you know, where you could get to quick too also.
Were there any major accidents that you can recall?
Well, there were some that I really didn't, I know one real bad one that had happened in 1420 where we had lost 2 fellas down in a tank.
What happened?
Well, it had fumes in it, and one of them went down, and apparently didn't have the protection, and he passed out, and the other guy went down to get him, and he passed out, and they both died.
Wow.
Yeah. And I was told it was one execution, but I didn't really know about it, something in our power operations, you know, the electricity. And we also had one fellow to hang himself down there.
We heard about him, Andy, and he ended up haunting the...
Yeah, it sort of felt funny going through where he was found. I know, you know, of course, we all knew where he was hanging, and a lot of talk went on about that for years.
Did you ever have any experiences like that where doors were shutting or noises were being made or anything like that?
No, not really.
No.
Because this was a huge, you know, this is a huge plant, and because there wasn't any doors on the operating floors you could hear anywhere anyway, unless it's a toilet, restroom.
Do you feel like safety was a big emphasis?
Yes, I think it was. The only exception is, as I say, we didn't really know all the dangers of it.
Right.
It's just like respiratory equipment. To start with, all we had was a whole army assault mask, and hot weather, and we kept, buildings were hot anyway, and if you was in the gallery or cell floor, it was real hot a lot of times, and a lot of us had bad habit. If we got so hot, we'd pull that mask back, but of course, you wore it protection in case you had some little release or something that might be dangerous to you.
Right.
And even though we didn't know what all we was messing with, they told us that, you know, we should wear it. So I think they tried to be very safety conscious with us, and it's just something we had to learn to take control over ourselves and be sure we protected ourselves.
Did they do any monitoring of people's health?
No, not that I know of.
Like any preventative measures besides the masks?
Uh-uh.
I know that at one point you had your badges and there was There was film in there.
Yeah, they had the films in their badges, but also in the early years, we had to wear our own clothes. We didn't have, later years, they give, I think it's after I wasn't an operator, or after I don't believe I was ever furnished coveralls and things, but to start with, you wore your street clothes and wore them home and everything. But there wasn't anything actually back then said about it.
Do you think that caused any problems later on?
I never heard of any that actually, no. Of course, there's lots of people that's had diseases and things that they feel was caused from out there, which a lot of them probably were. But so far, I've been lucky. Some of them said they read it must have helped you.
Super strong.
Oh, I said, yeah, that in 38 years shift works, what done it?
Yeah. I've heard stories about things that radiation can do. Were there any stories that were going around during that time about, you know, the after effects?
Not really in the early years. Later years, we started hearing this. You know, if you were breathing this stuff, you know, you was likely to get lung cancer. In which, like I say, I know several people's died with lung cancer and all, but I know several that wasn't even working there's died of lung cancer too. So it's, you know, it's a hard thing, but they know that it did cause cancer of different types and all.
And were you ever hurt on the job?
Don't believe there was. I don't remember ever having a really recordable injury. I was one of the few. If I ever hurt myself a little bit, I didn't report. If I hurt my rib or something, overchecking something or something like that. But just minor things like that, I never had anything major.
During the wartime, you said that you were up on the operations floor. Did you know what you guys were doing? Did you know what the process was and what it was going to be used for?
No, ma'am. I actually didn't know. We sort of suspicion maybe, but I didn't really know until they reported today here in Oak Ridge that they dropped the bomb. And
what was your reaction to that?
I was tickled to death. You know, to know that we've helped what looked like was going to stop the war, which it did stop it pretty quickly then.
I heard there was dancing in the street.
Oh, there was, and there's a picture that's at the museum and everywhere, and there's one fella in there with his hands thrown up, and I tell my wife that's me, but I can't even remember exactly where I was, you know, when it happened.
Wow.
So that's been, I say, 60 years ago now.
Yeah. I've gotten mixed reactions to that question.
Uh-huh.
You were speaking of your wife. Did you meet your wife during the time you were working at K-25?
I'd known Dot in Memphis. I'd met her in Memphis. I had two sisters was down in Memphis, and Dot and her sister was in Memphis. And I'd met her, but we didn't get together. She came up here in February, a few days before I got here in March. And we started dating probably in 46 and fell in love and ended up getting married in 47, in October 47. But she worked 2 years at K-25.
And what did she do?
To start with, you had vacuum testing people that tested the equipment for leaks and all, which most of this was done on the cell floor, and they'd get through with it and turn it over to operation, people like us. And then later on, they put her in line recorder operation. You had line recorders to check your stream, see impurities in your stream. You could tell what was going up the cascade. And she worked in that until they decided to get rid of the women, and she got laid off in 1947.
How do you feel that women were treated?
Well, at that time, I thought they were treated pretty equally, actually, just like we did.
Do you think that there was any kind of discrimination?
I didn't see any back at that time, because they, like the operator, they were paid the same as I was, you know, and of course I made crew leader pretty quick, and you got raises as you went up like that. A crew leader was the next thing, then a supervisor after that.
What about minorities?
Minorities just weren't there to start with, and when they were mostly in janitorial departments. And of course, I was from the South, and I've never really been around colored people, black people. We called them colored back then. Mm-hmm. And of course, most feelings of people like me were that you didn't want to work with them. That's just honest about, And of course, this changed later on. And I remember I had a big black fella that became a janitor foreman, first foreman that the black man was made. And I just loved the fella. And of course, it gradually worked itself in. And I had quite a few black operators in later years, especially in the axle plants.
But there was definitely separation.
Yeah, it was to start with. But I think it gradually worked itself in, and it's turned out pretty good.
How do you think that, well, let's change.
Go ahead.
Yeah. I'm going to change tapes because